Einen wunderschönen guten Tag, sehr verehrte Damen und Herren.
Good
Herzlich
morning,
willkommen
dear
zu
ladies
unserem
and gentlemen.
digitalen
How very warm
anlässlich
welcome
der
to our
TIRE Cologne
digital
2022,
conversation
der
for the TIRE
internationale
Cologne
Leitmesse für Reifen und
2022,
Räder.
the
Schön, dass Sie
International
online
Lead Trade
zugeschaltet
Fair
haben.
for
Mein Name
Tyres and
ist Camilla
Wheels.
Biasio und
Thank
ich
you for
freue mich
being
wirklich
here with us
sehr, Sie durch
online.
die nächsten
I'm Camilla
45
Biasio and
Minuten
I'm very
führen
pleased
zu dürfen. Und
to
als
be taking you
erstes
through
würde
the
ich
next
sehr, sehr
45
gerne
minutes.
mein Podium
Well, to begin
vorstellen.
with, I'd
An
love to
meiner
introduce my
Seite
panel
Herr
here.
Oliver
To
Frese,
my
einen schönen
side,
guten
Mr.
Tag,
Oliver
Geschäftsführer der
Frese. Good
Köln-Messe,
morning,
ist
Mr.
mit
Frese,
dabei.
the General
Ebenfalls mit
Manager
dabei darf ich begrüßen
of
zu meiner anderen
Köln-Messe.
Seite Herr
And
Stefan
there
Helm,
is
Vorsitzender
Stefan
des
Helm, the
Bundesverbands
chairman
Reifen-
of the
und
National
Vulkaniseur
Association of
Handwerk, kurz
the
BAV.
Tire and
Und last
Vulcanizers
but of course
Trade,
not
BRV.
least, auf
And
der anderen
last
Seite
and
des
certainly
Podiums
not
begrüße ich Ingo
least,
Riedeberger,
there is
Director
Ingo
der The TIRE
Riedeberger,
Cologne. Herzlich willkommen. Guten Morgen.
Director of the
Ja,
TIRE Cologne.
natürlich möchten wir nach unserem
Of
Pressegespräch
course,
auch ein
directly
bisschen in den
after our
interaktiven
conversation, we'd
Dialog mit
also
Ihnen
like to get
treten,
into a more
liebe Gäste.
interactive
Dafür
dialogue
dürfen
with
Sie
you,
gerne
dear
unsere
guests.
Chatfunktion
For that,
nutzen. Wenn
please
Sie
refer to
also
our chat
Fragen
function.
haben, dann stellen Sie sie uns
So if
gerne,
you
wir
have
werden
any
sie im Anschluss
questions, then please do
beantworten.
not
Bitten Sie
hesitate
aber
to
auch
put
um
them to
Verständnis,
us.
dass
We
wir
will
heute
answer them
natürlich
at
nicht
the
alle
end,
Fragen in der
but we
offenen
also
Runde
have to
beantworten
ask you to
können.
understand
Aber
that
im
we
Nachgang
cannot
steht das
answer
Presseteam
all of your
selbstverständlicherweise
questions, but
für
the
Sie
press
zur
team is
Verfügung.
obviously going to be
Manchmal kommt auch
available
eine Frage
for
vielleicht
as
erst
long
morgen
as you
oder
want,
übermorgen. Nutzen Sie
and
die
they will be
Gelegenheit und
available to
treten
answer
Sie
them.
in
Sometimes
Kontakt
a
mit
question
unserem
might
Presseteam
only
der The TIRE
pop up
Cologne.
tomorrow.
Unsere
Contact them
Einstimmung,
and they
jetzt
will
ein kurzer
answer.
Film.
And now we'll start with a little film.
Ja, starten möchten wir an dieser Stelle mit
Right,
unserem
we'd like to begin at
Pressetalk.
this
Herr
point
Frese,
with
ich
our
möchte
press
gerne
talk.
mit Ihnen
Mr.
beginnen.
Friese, I would love to
Tatsächlich hat
start
die
with
Pandemie
you.
leider nach wie vor noch
In
enorme
fact, we have to
Auswirkungen
say
auf
the
die
pandemic
Messewelt.
still has
Messen
us in
werden
its grip.
abgesagt oder sie werden
Trade
verschoben.
fairs are being
Es gibt viele
suspended,
digitale
they're
Formate, die
cancelled,
bereits
even
entwickelt wurden, die
postponed.
im Gespräch
Lots of
sind.
digital
Konzepte werden
formats have been
angepasst und auch
developed,
die The TIRE
concepts
Cologne
are
musste nach
adjusted,
ihrer
and the
Premiere
TIRE Cologne, after its premiere in 2018, it had to be postponed twice, but in a way that meant a cancellation. So how are things looking now for 2022? Well, firstly, when I see the film that I just saw as a trade fair organizer, I mean, this really warms your heart, because those are the images that we do want to see, because the TIRE Cologne is going to be happening in May. You just said, for pandemic reasons, in 2020, we had to postpone the event into 2021, and then we couldn't even let it take place in 2021. But now in May 22, the TIRE Cologne will finally be there. And of course, it's important for us that it will then happen, that the restart is there, that we provide a platform to industry. But for us as the trade fair industry, we have to say it was really tough. I mean, there is no beating around the bush here. Since February, March 2020, we haven't been able to do any proper event, real live. In autumn, we began to start again, and the situation is a bit like one step forward, one step back. So Pro Suites ISM will happen with 1,100 exhibitors real live here in Cologne next week, which obviously is great, but not every manufacturer can actually manage to attend. But we've really tried to use the time as Köln-Messe. We have invested into several tools, into further development of our online facilities. So we actually tried to see this as an opportunity. We actually see the glass half empty and not half full, but not half empty, of course, and do whatever we can to make sure we're really fit, so that at the end of the pandemic, when it is permitted, we can start with a vengeance. Well, this is positive and also optimistic. Then I think we're fully on track. Mr. Friese, you just mentioned ISM and Pro Suites Cologne. Cologne, how can you guarantee that exhibitors and visitors can be safe and sound when visiting the trade fair, and also one that is a good experience? Well, firstly, let me say that B2B events are allowed. Also, legally speaking, we do that. We have ticket registrations, expert visitors have the right to attend, and we have developed a special concept, Be Safe for Business, and that is something that we first developed last autumn, when we had Anuga here with 4,500 exhibitors. We had visitors from 169 countries, and the concept is well proven. What does it mean, #Safe for Business? Well, it means that you are permitted to visit the events. You obviously have to wear your mask, that goes for sure, but basically when you're at the store, at the booth, and somebody offers you a drink or something to eat, you're allowed to have that. We'll have wider aisles. I mean, you see, for ISM Pro Suites, we shall see this for the TIRE Cologne. We'll have bigger distances, wider gaps, wider aisles. We'll digitally ask our visitors and do the visitor survey. Online, we'll have contactless controls at the entrances. We have linked the ticketing system with the certificate checking, so vaccination certificates or test certificates, because access will be restricted to those who can make 3G. So fully vaccinated, recovered and/or tested, and that is something that we can do with our electronic ticketing system. So it'll be very easy for people to get onto the premises. So you see, it's a whole host of things that we have developed. You have disinfectant machines everywhere. Toilets and other surfaces are cleaned basically uninterruptedly. Visitors are completely safe and sound. We have the most modern halls. We have huge halls, very high ceilings. We have air influx management. So it could not be more modern and up to date. And we've proven that in autumn. And this is all under the umbrella of Safe for Business. It sounds like an intelligent safety and security concept, and I think that is what's needed. You also talked about wider aisles. It's also an optical difference. If you look at the trade fairs of the olden days, look different from what we have here now during the pandemic. Are other things that are different with today's trade fairs? Well, we have to say that this is always a bit of a difficult comparison, and we always look at numbers of visitors that we can get. Now, we have to say, now, at the moment, we do see a challenge for visitors coming from Asia, from China, because they just cannot travel right now. If you return to China, you have to go into a rigid 3-week quarantine, which it means it is no option really. So we can already say that certainly we shall have fewer visitors or exhibitors from Asia, let alone China. It's also a challenge when it comes to shipping goods from there and to that part of the world. But apart from that, we have to say these things are working very well. You could see that from the autumn events in 2021, because people are eager to get together again. A virtual meeting can be as good as it is. It does not replace human contact. I mean, you see people meeting at these events and hugging one another, really being relieved that they're getting into personal contact again. Companies actually show their products and their things, and visitors can taste it, smell it, feel it, and be present. It just is a different contact experience, and that is why trade fairs are so important. I think before and after the pandemic is not going to feel so different. But as I said, there are lots of tools, lots lots of good digital tools that have been added. And we have to say that the TIRE Cologne is also going to be a hybrid format. So we shall also be offering all of the companies an opportunity of being present online, so that at the end of the day, the participation is more long-lasting because you'll still be there online. I mean, it's basically a merger of the real world, live world, and the digital world. So we think about new impulses, new catalysts. We've already talked about the fairs happening in the last 2 years, and we said, yes, trade fairs, yes, please, as soon as possible, but the digital alternative, is that valid, and will that stay? Well, I have to say we are firmly convinced that there is strong value add in there. As I said, no digital media can replace human interaction and contact, and that's, I think, good news. We all know that. But the pandemic has propelled digitization and the digital transformation way forward. We have to clearly say that, and there are good things about that as well. I mean, we are now able to support the event with digital elements, to not just differentiate between digital and live and hands-on, but to basically merge these two formats. We can give companies greater or more long-lasting reach, or that people can still show their products weeks after the real event, the live event, and to still get contacts then. And that is where all of that digital stuff is very helpful. But people do want to meet one another, they want to meet the offering, and they want to meet the product. Well, could we already talk about a digital transformation of the trade fair economy? It will continue to be an important element, but as you say, the direct interaction between exhibitor and visitor is important and key, and seems to stay so. Thank you, Mr. Friese. I would now like to take you along with me and really look at the wheels and tires industry, and I turn to Mr. Stefan Helm. He's the chairman of the BRV. Thank you for being here. Mr. Helm, how are things looking nationally as well as internationally? Well, BRV is a national German organization at the moment, so our core focus is on Germany and developments here. But we can say that these generic views, how is the market going, is often not precise. There is no such thing as the market. We have a north-south divide in Europe. And we also see differences in Germany. So, for example, in the south, you noticed the pandemic much more than in the north. Just for example. But as I said, cross-averaging is never that precise, but you end up with a number. We can say that in the consumer area, so the classic passenger car SUV is something that really suffered, certainly in the early phase, 2020, we had a marked slump. One thing that has recovered strongly last year, but was still pre-crisis level in this section. So we can say there was a degree of recovery, but if you look at the consumer development, you can say transporters have developed really well. HGVs transporting is an area that has benefited. So we actually have to see people are individually affected. What kind of retailer or company am I? Where are my customers and how have they developed? I think there is no crisis that has no winners. I mean, the classic passenger car, like one that I suppose you drive, has really suffered because people have been in home office. Certainly the fleet business has been affected and now is involved in recovery work. But the whole of the professional and transport area, as I just said, HGVs, transporters, the classic package that is being transported from online sales, but anything that works online has worked well. There was a little dent at the beginning of the year 2020, but some companies stayed with a small minus. And then last year we had a recovery race that has basically taken us onto the level of pre-pandemic times. But if you look at how industries have been affected, logistics industry, event industry, food and catering. I mean, if you remember how many packages of pasta and toilet paper bought to make sure they secured their business, it was bizarre. So if I've understood you correctly, there have been increases in positive trends, but there are also areas where there is leeway to make up, but where the recovery race is ongoing. What would you say was the impact of the pandemic for the tire and wheels industry? Well, in a nutshell, I can say it's a volume topic. And we have to say that the different segments were negatively affected in different ways. But we think that lots of colleagues had to react with cost measures. There are companies that have done so right away. We have had companies that have really closed down for a while. Some have actually really closed down for 3-4 weeks in the initial phase. And if you then reduce capacity, if I think about car dealers, for example, closed showrooms, then obviously there is a lot less sale happening. But there are others who have actually increased their sales figures. So I think this is not easy to generically answer. So the situation is very diverse. But the cost topic, energy costs, product costs, be it owed to the pandemic or not, it seems to be happening at the same time as this pandemic. All of that does affect us, and negatively. We basically saw a recovery and we saw price increases. We also saw wage increases, and at a time where we're not yet back to the pre-crisis level, this can be economically challenging. But I think we are still not that bad, really, because if I say we only had single-digit losses and we're already in the recovery race, I certainly do not want to be in the shoes of the hotel and catering industry or some others. And I think there are massive effects and repercussions of the pandemic in all areas. Now, if you look at industry and trade over the past 2 years, what have they done to be solutions-orientated, but to stay agile and ready to act and react? I think that was a strong topic really at the start, because we were so unsure. So people at the start seemed to say, oh, you are dealers, a lot of your members are dealers, so they have to close down. And we then had to prove that this whole topic of mobility was very relevant, and that without us, the whole industry could not be working. I can certainly say that for my company, police, firemen, heavy goods vehicles, agriculture. I think if you don't cater to those, then you don't need to open the door in the morning. But it's still challenging to organize this. So it starts with a good hygiene concept, goes without saying today. But how can I organize my store? Because it is as it is. How can I make sure that distances are kept? Basically, product handover, contactless product handovers weren't normal 2 years ago. But being in contact, having virtual and online contact with suppliers, we had to work at this. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said this is not possible for our industry. But, I mean, I've had a lot of company conferences completely virtually, completely online. It's actually worked very well. And I can only support what Mr. Frese says. I mean, some things work as catalytic converters. And as an entrepreneur, I'm an optimist by profession. And I think these things will have to continue. But there are digital digital tools that are good for our efficiency and that makes sense also from an entrepreneurial point of view. I hate correcting you. I said I'm a hopeless optimist, but a hopeful optimist would possibly be even nicer. I mean, as you said, you don't just need to find solutions, but you also need to continue to be ready to work and act and make money. But if we look at trade and industry of this, and we look at costs and budgets, and we say we want to stay agile, then you obviously have to place new investments and think about your capex and make sure that that is future orientated. What do you think are the most important future topics, the trends? Digitization, very clearly a capex topic, and I would certainly say this is the normal homework you have to do in your company to make sure that you have a healthy margin that will make sure you survive. I mean, this has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. I mean, we are technically coming from a retail basis, but now we're talking about more and more a service industry. So it is about selling service much more than before. This is gained new value and importance. Are you there? Are you available? Can we come? Is something that people find good now. 2 years ago, they would have found it went without saying. But I think it is a value that is perceived as one that doesn't come automatically. So yes, digitization, that's something that's hard work and hassle, but I have to make sure that I have to make the money available for those, make the budget available. Sustainability is very, very important. And it moves the whole of our industry. This is a topic we all need to face, especially as tire dealers and tire trade. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to stick with our wheels, but you have to make sure that you are ready and you respond to new challenges. Well, thank you very much to Mr. Helm for your assessment and your thoughts. We have heard how important it is to have good networking across traders. This is a nice transfer, and because I would like to link myself up with you, dear guests, with the gentleman who is joining us live from Frankfurt. We're very pleased indeed. I would like to welcome Mr. Anish Taneja, President CEO of Michelin Northern Europe. Good morning.
Schönen guten Tag zusammen. Hallo in die Runde.
Good morning. Hello to everybody. Mr. Taneja, you can hear us well. That is very good and essential for such a format. Many people didn't know why has Michelin as a global player decided to participate in the TIRE Cologne. Well, it was not a difficult decision for us because there were quite a few reasons for this. We actually thought that the concept of the TIRE Cologne was very promising before the pandemic came. It linked trade and fleet and industry. We thought the Retread conference was a very good platform, and I think these first steps in linking a classic trade fair format and the digital platforms were convincing and looked good. So we said, yes, we want to accompany that and want to be on board and see whether we can develop things further. And the second thing is that it's a classic B2B format that is very good and important for us. And we have our trading partners whom we see there. And I hope we'll get together for an exchange here and new topics. Unfortunately, we have a bit of a sound problem here. We think that as an industry, we really have to understand that our product isn't just black and round, but there is a value add involved in this, that they contribute to sustainable mobility and that there is a high potential for innovation in there. And we can only do that with a strong platform that we communicate above our own plate and out. That's good to hear. Unfortunately, I have to say that in between we didn't really hear you very well. We very much hope that the stream for our participants continues to be strong so that they can listen. You just said for you the TIRE Cologne is one of the important networking formats, possibly one of the most important ones. What are the core messages that Michelin is going to bring to Cologne? I think there are two big topics. The first one is sustainability. It is known that by 2050 we have committed to make sure that all our products are produced on the basis of organically grown or sourced materials. And we just want to make sure that that ecological approach is there and is further developed. How can we link economy and ecology? And I think as a company today, if I may say so, we are at the forefront of things, but we want to stay leaders when it comes to this. And obviously this goes hand in hand with the question of electromobility. How can tires contribute to good results here? With Michelin e-primacy last year, we had the first product that made sure that e-cars had 7% more reach with the same battery load. So I think there is a lot to win. Well, we're actually already looking forward to it a lot, and we're looking forward to welcome Michelin as an exhibitor to the TIRE Cologne 2022. Thank you very much, Mr. Taneja, to Frankfurt. Thanks to all of you, and we wish you a good conference, and I look forward to coming to Cologne under good circumstances, I hope. Thank you. That's exactly what we'll do. And then, Mr. Riedeberger, I'll come to you. Statements of Michelin that I'm sure are warming your heart. As the director of the TIRE Cologne, I think all information is channeled in your office. So what can we expect from the TTC? Well, I think the TIRE Cologne promises to be the meeting place of international tire industry. You have heard that with Michelin we have actually been given an additional important participant, or it was there before, but we've only published it now, where we have Conti, Pirelli, Hankook, Falcon, all the big manufacturers are there. But the TIRE Cologne stands for the whole wide range of the supplier. So we have Superior, whom we've won back to the TIRE Cologne, and also in the trade segment, Interpneu, GDR, GDHS, Bohnenkamp are all large names. International players at Deldo, Intersprint and others. All in all, I can say we're expecting about 300 companies and brands who are going to be present. We aren't there in full yet, which is owed to the pandemic. It's a bit of a hesitant registration process. We don't just have that for the TIRE Cologne, but we have that in other trade fairs that are held during pandemic times. And so, for example, last week we have received 3 big names who have registered now last week and said, yes, we will be participating. So all in all, we'll have a highly representative TTC, and it's certainly one that will have a wide footprint, possibly not in the depth that we knew from pre-corona times. Well, the pre-pandemic things were different, as you just said, but the process of registration, the timing before a trade fair, all of that has changed. So step by step, or tire by tire, we're going back into a new normality. Mr. Riedeberger, you said it's a little less deep, but some have already registered. 2 or 3 big players are still missing. Why can they not decide? Well, that's true. I was obviously not happy that when Bridgestone in autumn decided that they would say no to, wasn't a statement about the concept of the TIRE Cologne, but they have taken taken internal decisions that apply for the year 2022, and we, just like others, have to live with those and accept them. But all in all, I would say that for the industry and the visitor, it's very good that visitors get an interesting, comprehensive market overview, and that is what we can guarantee. And that is why, with the TIRE Cologne, we will work on a marketplace that is going to be comprehensive and good. Let me go back to the topic of digitization. If I may say so, we have already heard from my first two discussion partners that this is a very relevant topic, but the TIRE Cologne is now offering a digital value add. But can you possibly explain, Mr. Riedeberger, what that means? Yes, of course. We've already said that the process of digitization gathered strong momentum throughout the pandemic. Mr. Friese already said we have done lots of things, but you can't say all businesses, all industries are the same, all lines of business are the same, and put a filter on top of it and say this is one size that fits all. For the TIRE Cologne, we've based it on two pillars. The one is the digital content that we're putting into the center of attention here. So on our TIRE stage, we'll have a well-managed program that we be staging. We'll have exclusive interviews that'll be streaming live, and afterwards we'll make them available as VODs, so as videos on demand. So that means that people who don't have the time or don't have the opportunity to come to the TIRE Cologne can log on and follow the program from afar. But it also means that a visitor who has a personal conversation with an exhibitor isn't in conflict. He or she can decide to visit the appointment that they want, and they think the conference program is not going to be missed. They can look at it later because it's available as a stream online. But then the networking, I mean, that is one of the essential tasks of a trade fair. And with a smart app, we really have an opportunity of supporting contacts and feeds. I mean, we can find people very easily based on the app. We can trigger dates or meetings and get into contact. So there is going to be sort of a TTC at home, if I may say so. Now, you just talked about the stage, the TIRE stage. This is an event program. You've made me a little bit curious. What can we expect from the stage? Well, you know, since the TIRE Cologne has been in Cologne, we have said let's divide it into the standard program and the ARTI program. We want to make sure that supply and demand get to meet. That is the underlying task of trade fairs. But I think a trade fair today must also inspire, must inform, must radiate new impulses, must breathe new things and a new spirit. And that is what we're trying to do via the event program. And we are doing so with our events program, with the program on stage, with theme areas or topical areas. Let's look at the TIRE stage that you just talked about. That is something where we talk about current problems of the industry. For retail, for industry, digitization, it is sustainability, as I just said, with the recycling forum. But it is also a new target group, such as the fleet management. Moreover, we also have themed areas, so that is for practice-orientated tasks. So we have assembly spaces for tires. I mean, assembly, I mean, that's really bread and butter business for the retail industry. Mr. Taneja has already hinted at it indirectly. Things are changing. We have more high-performance tires, we have run-flat tires, and things that are really used and exchanging those requires a certain machine setup. It needs a degree of further and advanced training so that people need to have the qualification to apply these technologies, and those are things that we are presenting with BAVR members, how that can be done. A second topical area where we're working with Bohnenkamp is large-scale tires. That is your average caterpillar application, huge construction machines or agricultural combine harvesters, things like that. This is a complicated, complex business, and that is why we're showing this for this area. But we can certainly say, so I'll just come back to Mr. Riedeberger. We have already looked at what there is in terms of highlights at the trade fair boulevard, but the topic of sustainability is so important. You've already emphasized this aspect, but let me ask again, what's new in the field of sustainability? Well, you just said boulevard. There's going to be a boulevard of sustainability. That means that on the central area, the trade fair boulevard that links the northern halls with one another, there we will offer a stage for the topic of sustainability. So we'll have theme islands, if I may say so. We demonstrate the life cycle of a tire, and on these islands we can show solutions, we can show innovative products, we can show studies or research results around this. We talk about gaining the raw materials, the production, the use, the then collection, the retreading and remolding down to final recycling and reprocessing. That is one aspect. And then we have the Global Retreading Conference. Again, I can say it also had to stop. It is organized by the Association of European Retreaders. They'll do it on the first trade fair day. By Paver is the name of the association. You might have possibly heard it. And they basically will show retreading as an important element of the circular economy. We'll do so with relevant players and stakeholders, political representatives, retail, and of course industry. We're really looking forward to that, and after the Global Retreading Conference we'll also have an award ceremony, the Recircle Award, that is organized by a publishing house, so that I think we'll have a very holistic, appealing, informative and interesting program of special contents. So also in the field of sustainability we can expect a multifaceted, interesting program that will inspire and inform us. Now, I would like to put another question to the CEO, Mr. Friese, because that is a question that many people are very interested in, because this year we have an overlap in with the date with the Auto Promotech. Why is that, and what are the effects? Well, we certainly look at ourselves at the TIRE Cologne, but the pandemic has also messed up the international calendar of events. This doesn't just affect the TIRE Cologne. For us, it was always clear, and we had always agreed that with the tire manufacturers and dealers. So this trade fair always happens May, June in odd years. So that's what the industry wanted, and we said it's going to stay like that. But Auto Promotech has moved. Why? Well, I don't know, but the Automechanica in Frankfurt couldn't happen in 2020. It was moved into 2021, and to make sure that there wasn't a collision there, they then moved their date. so that we're happening in parallel or, well, nearly parallel. This is a once-off event, and we think the market is going to regulate that. For us, it was clear we stay on our established date. I mean, the Corona crisis and the pandemic basically has brought a lot of problems, but as Mr. Riedeberger has said, the success shows us that we're right with what we're doing with the TIRE Cologne here in Cologne. Well, a clear statement and a clear attitude, and I would take this over for a final round. I would actually like to ask my participants, the panelists, with a short statement, Mr. Frese first, then Mr. Helm and Mr. Riedeberger, and ideally on the topic, what do you think about TTC 2022 and how do you see the year ahead? We're looking at 2022 very optimistically indeed, and TTC, of course, is going to be super. This Sunday we'll have ISM and ProSuites Cologne with a proper live trade fair already, and that momentum is going to carry us into the year, and we are very sure that in May we'll have a strong TIRE Cologne, so full throttle and very optimistic. Mr. Helm, you certainly are a hopeful optimist, and I am as well. I think there are lots of forecasts, and I'll just say that we are very much hoping that it will happen. But I think that the topic of personal contact is absolutely essential for the industry, not just for the trade fair, but for all of us, for our life. And despite everything happening, we still know that this is a people business and a people's business, and it basically has shown the added value of people meeting and getting here, and the trade fair is the right tool for this, and I'm very much with Mr. Frese when it comes to this. I think we as an industry need this, and I cannot wait to actually see all of my colleagues live and kicking. Mr. Riedeberger, well, thank you. For me and certainly for my whole team, I can say that we're very happy that with the TTC, the trade fair life is going to continue, and we can feel that the mood is great, and we are deeply preparing all of the events with our partners, also with the participants and industry players. We're working hard really on all of these topics, and then it feels very good to reap the reward by having your full event in May. So despite the high numbers of cases at the moment, we think that in May we will be safe and sound and live and have large numbers of visitors, also international ones. Well, optimism and hope certainly are at the forefront. Thank you very much, and we'd now like to come to your questions. So questions that you find important, and we have already collected a few questions, and we're starting with the first one, and that is that the AUMA Association, 71% of planned fairs were cancelled. In 2020 it was 68%. How likely is it that we'll have the TIRE Cologne in spring 2022? Well, I've just said that. I mean, there's no doubt the TIRE Cologne will be happening in May. As I said, we have an international leading trade fair, ISM, here from this Sunday, and in May things are going to be all even better. We think things are going to develop positively. All of the infections and all of the pandemic effect is there, yes, but people immensely want to get together, and we need trade fairs. Our exhibitors need trade fairs and want them, so no doubt we'll have a very strong trade fair year. Some events had to be postponed, and it had got something to do with specific markets they were working on, but we really are absolutely sure that 2022 is going to go well. In May we will be through, and we'll have a strong TIRE Cologne, definitely. Thank you. How many of your own Köln-Messe events had to be cancelled in the last 2 Corona years? I actually don't have the precise number, but basically in 2020 we only were able to do anything up until February, and then the first live events started in September 21. That was a year and a half. I'd say 70% of our portfolio had to be cancelled or suspended or were run as sheer digital events. We actually had a few events that happened on digital concepts. Interzum at Home, H&H Cologne, Gamescom and Demexco happened just as digital formats. So it is not that the events didn't happen at all. They were organized as digital formats, but 70% of our calendar could not be implemented, and you see the slump in Köln-Messe's results in the last 2 years. Pandemic here or there, somebody says. Development cycles of the automotive industry and the workshop industry are relatively independent from those. Which technologies and companies of the automotive industry and aftermarket are very much in the focus? Mr. Helm, I think that's a question for you. Well, let me give it a try. Well, firstly, the market lives of what's in there and not about new registrations. I think in the aftermarket we're 10 years behind, until it trickles down to us. So there is a certain rigidity in there. So we don't have such a big pandemic effect. Of course, the topic of electromobility affects us because it means that we have different tires and a different demands. We talk about extending the reach of e-powered vehicles. We heard that e-tires, but we also have connectivity at the workplace, so interconnected plant and equipment for workshops. They basically go into the merchandise information system and therefore deeply into the DNA of our workshops. It's actually very, very good that we're strongly growing in the passenger car. We talk about higher fuel consumption and wear and tear, and we basically have challenges when it comes to safety and security. I think that's all a challenge. Well, we'll still have to roll our sleeves up and get there. We'll ask the next question. How has the trade fair made use of this calm phase? Have you invested into buildings or technology? Well, calling it a quiet phase or sleep phase, we didn't have that because we had to keep everything at, let's say, live temperatures. We have tried to do everything we could to be ready for an ad hoc restart, so that was hard work. But we have also invested, we have developed strongly, we have developed our events further. I think not one of the events that has been suspended or cancelled, none of them will look exactly as it looked beforehand. So there has been a further development of the topics, of the theme fields, of the formats. We've also invested into new events in international markets. So this year, for example, we will trigger 2 new events. That's all about mobility. Polis Mobility is going to be happening here, a new event that will newly launch. So it is about urban mobility. And in autumn we have an Anuga Horizon that's based on the portfolio of the food industry. We have 4 new international formats, one in Japan, for example, but also in the area of Middle East countries. So we've invested into new events, also invested into digitization, as I've just described. We have our own little digital platform ecosystem, so that we are in a situation of basically catering to the specific needs of the individual event. As Mr. Riedeberger just described, it needs to be something that really fits for the TIRE Cologne, and it needs to fit to other trade fair formats as well. We have digital event platforms that we have built and expanded on, and we have also invested into our premises here. So, for example, last year we have started with building our so-called convex format that is going to be implemented by 2024, when we're celebrating our 100th anniversary. It's going to be a conference format that can mean that 5,000 or 6,000 people can attend a conference. It's going to be a value add for the city, for the trade fair organization, and it is going to mean that we are going to have a very high appeal to the conference and seminar industries. I think we can say that we have digital signage all over with every building. We've just made sure that we have advertising options that we can offer to people that are way beyond what we used to have. I mean, signposting, paneling, I mean, we're setting benchmarks worldwide. We have basically used this, what they said, calmer phase, so that we basically, like Phoenix from the ashes, come out of this more quiet phase. Please don't get us wrong, but it actually sounds like anything but a calm phase. But that's good, because we'll pay off in the future. But we have another question. What are the preconditions or prerequisites that have to be fulfilled so that a proper trade fair format in attendance makes sense for everybody? Mr. Riedeberger or Mr. Frese? Well, I think we can certainly say supply and demand have to be brought together, and there has to be an adequate range of offers. So you can't really say this so generally. So each and every event has its own target, its own focus, its own range, and we say that the interesting thing that we're doing, organizing trade fairs, the customer is an integral part of the product. So no customer, no event, no exhibitor, no trade fair. And that is why we find it very important to reflect the full kaleidoscope of the market, to make sure that it's an attractive package that makes it interesting for people to want to come and see it, enriching it with forums, with seminars, with conferences, with boulevards. To make it really attractive is what we do. Sometimes you have 50 or 60 exhibitors and can be really good, or it is like an Anuga where we have 8,000 exhibitors in good times. I mean, it really depends, and it's always the specific needs and demands of the market that are mapped. There is another question that we have sort of answered, but somebody says, what focal areas are going to be the central areas of the TIRE Cologne? Mr. Riedeberger, it's your baby. I've already said it a few times, and Mr. Helm has summed it up yet again very well, what basically the requests are that are coming from the market. And as he rightly said, trade fairs are a reflection of what's happening in the market. We're talking about sustainability, about digitization, the way towards electromobility, but what does that mean for tires, ultra-high performance tires, or ultra-run flats, or saving electricity with good tires? for e-powered cars, and we want to show what's coming. Well, let's see if there are further questions. I see that some people are putting several questions, and this is one that is just coming in. But if the legal obligations are getting very tough, would you then contemplate organizing the trade fair as a hybrid event? Well, hybrid it already is, isn't it? Yes, exactly. It is the concept to have it as a hybrid event, and we have to look at the markets, the different markets, and each and every trade fair event respectively. We think the digital offering is enriching, but with the TIRE Cologne, we are not saying we would offer it as a sheer online event. Now, if against all odds everything is going to go into a major lockdown, then we'd push it to a different point in time. We would not offer it as a sheer online format, but we are very positive we'll have a physical trade fair with digital condiments. What experience do you as organizers have with the hybrid Anuga and Gamescom? Mr. Frese, you already talked about that a bit. I think it went quite well, but possibly you can say a bit more. We have, of course, had very multifaceted experiences. I mean, they're very different formats. Gamescom has now happened completely digitally twice. And our experience when it comes to that goes to show that we have caused tremendous reach for this event. And we, as a trade fair company, together with our partners, have really learned a lot. I mean, down to marketing, seconds of advertising space. I think it was a huge learning curve, and I think we can certainly use that for the future and for what's to come. And we can actually transport this. Certainly in the B2C sector, business to consumer, this is important. Anuga, it was very different because Anuga did physically happen and was a 100% hybrid event. So all exhibitors who were present here in Cologne, 4,600 exhibitors, were also represented on our digital events platform. And there we have seen how well this accepted alongside a physical event. Good results, really, but we as a company had to learn, as a trade fair organizer, said that the needs were very different for the physical event and for the digital platform. So we needed to set up two different teams so that at times you felt you were organizing two trade fairs at the same time. But we learned a lot about efficiency. Lots of things worked really well. Some things really didn't work and flopped completely. I mean, that's always, it's a permanent learning curve. And we hope to further develop this all. And I just talked about this little ecosystem that we have developed for ourselves as Köln Messe. I think that's not yet complete. We possibly will be adding one or two platforms. We'll then optimize it for our systems, and then we can actually offer markets individual tailor-made offerings to companies who are here in person. So I think we're very far when it comes to this, also as a trade fair company. Well, congratulations to that. I mean, I've just thought about it. Gamescom, I mean, they have a strong affinity to a digital performance, but the food industry is possibly different. I think there's the one or the other exhibitor amongst those 4,600 who needs help with a hybrid format. Well, it does depend, really. I mean, often one is surprised to see that industries have a digital affinity where you wouldn't have expected it. I mean, sometimes we were surprised, but we are actually looking at each and every industry. And as Mr. Riedeberg Berger said, we have intense conversations with representatives of the tire industry. And you said, is that the right solution? Should we be a sheer digital format, yes or no? And people have said, no, a sheer digital thing, though, that's the wrong thing. We don't want that. But let's look at a hybrid variant, or let's look for a different date where we can have it. But that's digitization. I mean, nothing is linear there. If we move away from this hybrid format and go back to a trade fair live as it used to be, and there's a question saying, how can a trade fair as a marketplace be strengthened by this time that we've just gone through? Well, let me say again, our experience from the autumn events is that there is an extreme desire amongst people to meet in person. And if I look at an Anuga, for example, we had a dental trade fair in autumn, we had a small child and youth event, and it was the same thing for each and every one. When we had the evening before opening event, I have shaken so many hands, as more hands than ever before in any event beforehand. People are really happy to meet again. They really feel that they have contact to make up. So we basically, of course, we need to be safe and sound, and it's possibly quite good to have wider aisles and to basically have a good atmosphere, even with distance, when people want to feel safe and sound. If you have a 4 or 5 meter wide aisle, in the past it was 2 or 3 meters. And the whole of this hygiene concept, I mean, these are all topics that we shall continue with, but let me tell you, people are dead happy to meet in person, and everybody hopes to come here in person. I mean, trading meetings existed in the Middle Ages. They will be there in future. Mr. Riedeberger, but trade fairs also develop because of new contents are coming up, and they're basically a reflection of the topics that are the hot topics for that specific industry. And that is also what trade fairs are important for. And trade fairs bring people together. We talked about networking and community building. And I think a trade fair organization is what brings such an industry together, what keeps it and holds it together. I think that's an important obligation we have. Pandemic or not pandemic. Mr. Helm, I have to turn a bit more towards you. We have another question from Great Britain. The TIRE Technology Expo has changed its date and is now happening less than a week before a TTC. The Auto Promotech sort of at the same time. What do you think about that decision, and what repercussions could it have for your event? Mr. Riedeberger. Well, Mr. Frese has already talked about the situation with Auto Promotech. I mean, it is owed to the pandemic that neither we nor other trade fair organizers have full control of where things go. This thing with Auto Promotech is very unfortunate, and I think we will basically have better dialogue with them in future so that it cannot happen again. That TIRE Technology has now very recently postponed their date. That has been a very, very recent decision. But the TIRE Technology is basically the pre-stage. The TIRE Cologne, we're talking about the finished product and how we are selling it, using it, applying it, and that we're a marketplace for that. But with TIRE Technology, it is the different production processes. And we don't think that our exhibitors are affected by this. So it actually fits quite well if you have the one trade fair a week ahead of the other. But I have just had another question here. How have exhibitors reacted to these overlaps? Have you had feedback? Well, you have to actually differentiate. The tire technology, we haven't had any reactions because there isn't really an overlap. But Auto Promotech, people found that very annoying, not just for us as organizers, also for exhibitors who consider both of these trade fairs to be important. I'm sure that's going to be the same as for the visitors. And people actually had different views about this. In many cases, we had different teams. They could service both sides. But in some cases, it was also such that the one company or the other had to decide, will I be in Cologne or in Bologna? And one decided for Bologna and the other for Cologne. That was not so easy, but it affected all of that. So this is also on Auto Promotech. We have answered all of that. Will Italian participants come? Well, as I just said, some do, some don't. I mean, some participate via their German holdings. Sometimes the headquarter has decided. Others said we can only do one, so we'll have to decide. So here, actually, the market split a little bit, and the Italian friends were more affected. Now, I look into our digital chat. You who are listening live online, you can use that to talk to us or ask us questions. Are there further questions? If there are, you can use the chat functionality here. But as I said, any further questions still coming up will be responded to by our experts here. Use the opportunity of turning to the press team of the TIRE Cologne and asking your questions, putting them to them. But in view of our timetable, if I do not see another question in the chat protocol, I'd actually like to come to the end of our digital press talk. And as I just said, there is a press release that we shall be sending out immediately afterwards. If you have open questions that remain, talk to the representatives. I would like to thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you to my panelists, Mr. Frese, Mr. Helm and Mr. Riedeberger. Thank you for the open, candid answers on all questions. I wish all of the participants a fantastic TIRE Cologne 2022. Have a good time till then and stay safe. Thank you.